The Galactic Council chamber was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of artificial gravity regulators and the clicking mandibles of the Inari delegation, who were always fidgeting with their sensory appendages. It was a rare occasion when all major species gathered in a single hall, but today's emergency session had drawn them in from every corner of the known galaxy. At the center of it all was Chancellor Varak, the towering, alien-like leader of the Kaithrak Dominion. His sleek obsidian feathers shimmered under the chamber lights as his piercing yellow eyes surveyed the crowd. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he extended his wings and addressed the assembly. "This council has made mistakes before," Varak admitted, his deep voice carrying authority. "But none as dire as the one we committed a century ago. We exiled the humans. We dismissed them. And now, we are paying the price." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged uneasy glances, while others let out guttural hisses or buzzing clicks of disagreement. Even among the oldest civilizations, pride was difficult to swallow. The mention of humanity, outcasts of the galactic community, the only species ever expelled from the Council, stirred something primal in every alien present. Fear, resentment, perhaps even regret. Then the holographic screen flickered to life, displaying real-time footage of the crisis unfolding at the edges of the Orion Arm. A fleet of biomechanical monstrosities, pulsating with eerie blue veins, tore through entire systems with ease. Planetary defenses crumbled in mere hours. The unstoppable force consuming everything in its path was an old terror reborn, the Xelari. We believed them extinct. Ambassador Vritza, a reptilian elder of the Hazothi Empire, hissed through razor-sharp teeth. We were wrong. The Xelari had last waged war nearly 10,000 cycles ago, a war so devastating that it had rewritten galactic history. No species alive today had ever encountered them firsthand. No species, except one, the humans, and humanity was gone. Or so they thought. Captain Elias Drake was the kind of man who could make an entire bar go silent simply by stepping through the doors. That wasn't just because of his reputation, though he certainly had one. It was the way he carried himself. The way his cybernetic arm flexed slightly as he scanned a room, the quiet confidence in his gait, the intensity of his gaze. He had the look of someone who had seen more battles than he cared to count, and survived all of them. At present, he was halfway through a bottle of Terran whiskey, sitting in a dimly lit outpost on the edge of human space. What was left of it, anyway? The bar wasn't much to look at. A few mismatched stools, flickering neon signs, a sticky floor that smelled faintly of engine grease and bad decisions. But it was home, and that was more than most exiled humans could say. He raised his glass to no one in particular. To the Council, he muttered dryly. And their infinite wisdom. The bartender, a burly man with cybernetic implants on his scalp, snorted. Still bitter about the whole banishing our entire species thing, RYA. Drake smirked but didn't reply. What was there to say? Humanity had been cast out of the Galactic Council 100 years ago, labeled as too dangerous, too unpredictable, too unwilling to follow the rules. At first, exile had nearly destroyed them. Cut off from vital trade routes, abandoned by their supposed allies, left to fend for themselves in a universe that had turned its back on them. But humans had a way of adapting. They carved out their own territories, built their own fleets. They became something else, something the Council had feared they would become all along. Survivors. A sudden hush fell over the bar, interrupting Drake's thoughts. The entrance had opened, and in stepped something that shouldn't have been there. A Council delegate. Specifically, a Xelari envoy. The creature's biomechanical exoskeleton glowed faintly in the low light. Its elongated skull-like face twitched slightly as it scanned the room. The patrons tensed, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Elias Drake, the Xelari rasped, its voice a whisper of static and malice. Humanity is required. Drake exhaled slowly. Yeah, that's so. The Xelari stepped closer, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. The Council begs for your aid. And just like that, the bar erupted into laughter. Drake leaned back, arms crossed, watching as the other humans around him jeered. He let them have their fun before speaking again, voice laced with dark amusement. After all these years, after all the bullshit, now they want us back? Let me guess, some existential threat is knocking at their doors. And suddenly, the exiled humans don't seem so bad anymore. The Xelari remained motionless, its eerie blue optics locked onto him. The Xelari have returned, it said simply. They will devour everything. You, too. Silence. Drake's smirk faded. 30 minutes later, he stood on the command deck of his ship, the Iron Fang, staring at the incoming transmission from the Council. It was Varak himself. Captain Drake, the Kaithrak Chancellor greeted, voice carefully neutral. It has been some time. Not long enough, Drake shot back. What do you want? We need humanity's expertise. Drake barked a laugh. That's rich. Last I checked, you all decided we were a problem. Dangerous. A blight on your pristine galactic utopia. Now you need our help? Sounds like poetic justice. Varak's expression remained unreadable, but the slight twitch in his feathers gave away his frustration. We do not have the luxury of pride. The Xelari will not stop. They cannot be negotiated with. You are the only species to have faced them and survived. Drake rubbed his temples. And remind me why we'd lift a finger to help the same bastards who left us to rot. Varak hesitated. Because if we fall, you fall with us. That much was true. Humanity had survived in the shadows, but they weren't invincible. If the Xelari spread unchecked, Earth would burn just like any other world. Drake sighed. All right. You want our help? He leaned forward, his grin turning sharp. Predatory. Then we're doing this my way. Varak inclined his head. We are listening. Drake's grin widened. You lot have spent the last century pretending we don't exist. Now, you're gonna give us full control over the war effort. We call the shots. We pick the battles. And you don't get to question us. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screeched in protest, murmurs of discontent surging through the ranks. Drake let them have their tantrum. Varak studied him carefully. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the Chancellor spoke. Very well. And just like that, humanity was back in the game. Drake cut the transmission and turned to his crew. Well, he said, rolling his shoulders. Looks like we're about to teach the galaxy why exiling us was the worst mistake they ever made. The Iron Fang hummed with energy, its engines roaring to life. It was time to go to war. The bridge of the Iron Fang was silent as Captain Elias Drake stood before the holographic war map, his cybernetic fingers tapping against the console. The room was packed with his officers, hardened men and women who had fought their way through the fringes of known space, exiles turned warlords, survivors turned soldiers. They were the best humanity had left, and now they were expected to save the same bastards who had thrown them away. Drake exhaled slowly before turning to his crew. All right, let's go over this mess. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying the current state of the war. Red markers spread like a plague across the map, showing the Xelari's rapid advance. Over 30 planetary systems had already fallen, each marked with the Council's desperate evacuation routes, most of which had already been overrun. The Council's forces have no chance, Commander Ava Sinclair said, arms crossed. She was Drake's second-in-command, sharp as a blade and just as ruthless. Their ships are built for border skirmishes and defensive patrols, not full-scale planetary extermination. Drake nodded grimly. They never had to fight a real war, and now they are paying for it. Sinclair narrowed her eyes at the map. You really think we can stop this? Drake smirked. I don't think. I know. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. This was what set humans apart from the rest of the galaxy. Where the Council saw extinction, they saw opportunity. Drake pointed at a contested sector. Here's how this plays out. The Council wants us to throw ships at the problem, but that's their mistake. They are trying to hold the line. We don't do that. Sinclair arched a brow. Then what do? We don't play defense. Drake's grin was razor-sharp. We go on the hunt. The first target was a system the Council had already written off, Theta 9. The Xelari had swarmed it days ago, wiping out everything in their path. Civilian ships had barely escaped, and now the system was marked as lost. That's exactly why Drake chose it. The Iron Fang tore through the void, leading a fleet of human warships that the Council didn't even know existed. They weren't sleek like Council vessels. They were brutal, heavily armored, bristling with weapons that had been outlawed for centuries. They weren't here to play by the rules. "Captain, we've got movement," Sinclair reported. "Xelari ships, clustered in high orbit. Looks like they are still stripping the planet for resources." Drake leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Perfect. That means they are distracted." The Council would have sent a distress call. The Council would have mobilized its fleet for a frontal assault. Humans didn't do that. Drake keyed in a command. "Engage silent running." No lights, no comms, nothing. "We go dark." One by one, the human ships powered down their visible energy signatures, blending into the void like ghosts. The Xelari, for all their strength, were predictable. They relied on overwhelming force, but they weren't prepared for what came next. The Iron Fang drifted into position, its weapons primed. "Now," Drake ordered, and all hell broke loose. The first salvo wasn't plasma or lasers. It was EMP warheads, detonating in a wave that shorted out Xelari sensors, disrupting their hive mind coordination. The second wave was kinetic. Tungsten slugs, fired at near-relativistic speeds, punched through Xelari ships like paper. Then, as the Xelari reeled, the real attack began. Human warships surged forward, moving with the precision of a predator striking its prey. Railguns thundered. Missiles spiraled through the wreckage. The Xelari, for the first time in recorded history, hesitated. And hesitation meant death. Within minutes, the Xelari fleet above Theta 9 was in shambles. Ships listed, burning, trying desperately to regroup. But humans didn't give their enemies time to breathe. Drake's voice was ice-cold. "Board them." Dropships launched, carrying squads of human soldiers clad in exo-armor, wielding weapons that the Council had long feared: plasma bayonets, disintegrator grenades, magnetic rail rifles. The Xelari had never been boarded before. They weren't built for close combat. Humans were. Drake himself led the charge, storming into the heart of a Xelari command vessel. His cybernetic arm crushed the first drone that lunged at him. Plasma fire tore through the air. Screeches of biomechanical agony echoed through the halls as human forces cut through the ship like a blade through flesh. And then they reached the core. Drake placed a demolition charge against the Xelari's central processing unit, the eerie blue veins pulsing like a heartbeat. He grinned. "Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine." The charge detonated, and the entire Xelari fleet screamed as their hive mind shattered. An hour later, Theta 9 was back in human hands. The fleet reassembled, victorious. The Xelari corpses floated in the void, a grim testament to the first real counterattack in the war. Drake sat in his command chair, watching as the Council's forces arrived, too late, as expected. The transmission came through immediately. Varak's face appeared, his yellow eyes wide with something that might have been shock. You destroyed them." Drake smirked. "You sound surprised." Varak hesitated. "Our forces have fought them for weeks and barely slowed them down. You eradicated an entire fleet in a single strike." "How?" Drake leaned forward, his tone dripping with amusement. "Because, Chancellor, humans don't fight fair." Murmurs broke out among the Council delegates behind Varak, their unease palpable. For a century, they had believed humans were a mistake, a danger. Now, they were realizing the truth. Varak composed himself. "The Council requests your strategy be implemented immediately." Drake chuckled. "Oh no, see, that's where you're mistaken." Varak frowned. "Explain." Drake's grin was predatory. "This isn't your war anymore. It's ours. And we're going to win it." Varak's expression darkened. "Do not forget, Captain, that you are still under the Council's authority." Drake cut the transmission. Sinclair arched a brow. "That'll piss them off." Drake laughed. "Good." Then he turned to the fleet. "Prepare for the next strike. We're not stopping until we wipe those bastards off the map." The war had just begun. But now, for the first time, it wasn't a war for survival. It was a war for revenge. The bridge of the Iron Fang was bathed in red light, emergency indicators flashing as the ship rocketed through the void. Drake gripped the armrests of his command chair, his cybernetic fingers twitching as he stared at the battlefield before him. The war had changed. The first few engagements had gone exactly as planned. Hit fast, strike hard, leave nothing behind. Humanity had driven the Xelari back in every sector they attacked. The galaxy had watched in stunned silence as the outcasts of the Council tore through an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. But now the Xelari had adapted. They were learning. Drake's fleet had jumped into the Pharos Nebula to launch another raid, only to find the Xelari waiting for them. The biomechanical monstrosities had altered their formations, countered the human tactics, set traps that had cost them 3 capital ships before they even knew what hit them. Now, Iron Fang and the remaining fleet were fighting their way out of a hellscape of enemy warships, swarming like a plague of locusts. "Captain, we're boxed in." Sinclair barked over the alarms, her voice tight with tension. "Xelari warforms on every vector. We need an escape route." Drake gritted his teeth. "No, we break through." Sinclair shot him a look. "That's suicide." Drake's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then it's a damn good day to die." He slammed a command into the console. "All ships, full burn. Punch a hole through their center. If we can't outrun them, we tear them apart." The Iron Fang's engines roared to life, and the fleet surged forward like a spear thrust into the belly of the enemy. The Xelari swarmed. Black biomechanical dreadnoughts closed in, their glowing veins pulsating like a hive of angry wasps. Strange, organic tendrils lashed out from their hulls, seeking to latch onto human ships and tear them apart molecule by molecule. Drake's fleet fired everything they had. Railguns spat tungsten slugs at near-light speeds, ripping through Xelari hulls like paper. Missile salvos detonated in fiery plumes, sending pieces of enemy vessels spiraling into the void. It wasn't enough. A Xelari dreadnought slammed into one of the human destroyers, wrapping its tendrils around it like a constricting snake. Within seconds, the human ship crumpled, its hull folding inward as the crew was torn apart. Sinclair swore. "They are not just fighting back. They are consuming us." Drake's eyes darkened. "Then we burn them all." He keyed into the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, switch to Hellfire protocol. Full saturation burn." There was a beat of stunned silence before Sinclair's voice cracked through the chaos. "Drake, that'll turn half our ships into slag." Drake's voice was cold steel. "Then we make it count." Hellfire protocol wasn't just a tactic. It was a declaration. It meant everything goes. No clean kills. No controlled engagements. Just raw, indiscriminate devastation. One by one, human ships activated their last resort weapons, plasma lancers, antimatter torpedoes, thermonuclear payloads that had been deemed too dangerous by the Council. The void ignited. Xelari ships screamed in their eerie, high-frequency wails as their bodies were incinerated. Their hive mind buckled under the sheer, relentless destruction. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to erase them. The battle raged. Human ships burned. Xelari warforms exploded in great, heaving death throes. The nebula itself was illuminated with the aftershocks of annihilation. And then, through the madness, the transmission came. "Captain Drake." The voice was not human. It was them. Drake's eyes narrowed as the Xelari hive mind signal cut through the static, broadcasting directly to his neural implant. The voice was not mechanical, nor purely organic. It was something else, something old. "You are different." Drake's grip on his chair tightened. "You have no idea." The voice pulsed with an eerie, almost fascinated tone. "We have consumed countless species. We have seen them break. We have seen them beg. But you revel in the void." Drake's smirk was humorless. "That's because we were born in it." A pause. Then the Xelari voice shifted, almost curious. "You could be part of us." Drake's blood ran cold. "They've never done this before," Sinclair whispered, hearing the open comms. "They are offering something." Drake already knew what. The Xelari didn't just devour. They absorbed, converted, assimilated. They took what made other species unique and twisted it into something else. And now, for the first time, they weren't just taking. They were inviting. Drake's jaw clenched. "You want to know why we scare you?" he asked, his voice barely above a growl. The Xelari hesitated. Drake leaned forward, his cybernetic fingers flexing. "Because you don't understand us. You think we fight because we have to." His grin was sharp, predatory. "But we fight because we love it." And then, without another word, he cut the transmission. "Fire everything." The human fleet unleashed one last, apocalyptic barrage. Every weapon fired in unison, every ship burning its reserves to the core. And for the first time in history, the Xelari fled. They recoiled, their war forms disengaging, their hive mind shrieking through the void as they pulled back. Not because they had lost, but because they had learned fear. The Iron Fang stood alone in the wreckage, the last human warship still operational. Drake exhaled, heart pounding. "Status?" Sinclair's voice was hoarse. "We won." Drake's lips twitched. "Damn right we did." But he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Drake stood at the bridge of the Iron Fang, staring at the tactical display before him. The Xelari had pulled back, retreating into the dark edges of the Orion Arm. But this wasn't defeat. This was something else. They were regrouping. The galaxy thought humanity had won a decisive battle, that the war had shifted. The Council hailed them as saviors. The same aliens who had cast them out now flooded their comm channels with gratitude, with desperate alliances, with promises of a future where humanity could finally be accepted again. Drake had never been more disgusted. "They are trying to pull us back in," Sinclair muttered beside him, arms crossed. "Like none of this ever happened." Drake smirked, but it was humorless. "They don't get it. They never did. Humanity had survived because they had been forced to. When the Council cast them out, they had been left with no allies, no infrastructure, no way forward except to become something new, something harder. And now the galaxy wanted them to go back." Drake turned to the bridge crew, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Pull up the latest Recon reports." A holomap flickered into existence, displaying deep space scans from the outer systems. The Xelari weren't just retreating. They were consolidating. Their forces weren't scattering in panic. They were forming a singular mass, bigger than anything recorded before. "They are coming back for round 2, Sinclair murmured. Drake nodded. "And they won't stop this time. They'll burn the entire galaxy just to be rid of us." A silence settled over the bridge. Every officer, every hardened soldier, knew what this meant. The Council would panic. They would retreat into their bureaucratic nonsense, try to negotiate or contain the problem. But Drake had seen the truth. There was only one way this ended. He activated the fleet-wide comms. "This is Captain Drake." He let his words hang in the silence before continuing, his voice ironclad. "I want every ship armed, every weapon loaded. We're not just defending this time." A few officers exchanged wary glances. Sinclair, however, smirked. "We're taking the fight to them," she finished. Drake nodded. The Council wanted a war of survival. Humanity was going to give them a war of annihilation. 3 weeks later, the fleet was ready. It wasn't just the Iron Fang anymore. Humanity's hidden strongholds, stations and shipyards that the Council had never known about, had finally opened their gates. What emerged was a sight no alien had ever imagined. Warships, real warships, monsters of steel and fire, built with one purpose: to destroy. The human fleet had always existed in the shadows, moving like ghosts through the edges of known space, never drawing too much attention. Now, they emerged in full force, weapons primed, hulls gleaming under the light of 1,000 suns. And they weren't going to wait. The Xelari hive mind had spent eons adapting, evolving, consuming. They had taken world after world, erasing civilizations from history. But for the first time, they had encountered something that wouldn't just fight back. They had found something that would hunt them down. Drake sat in his command chair as the fleet surged towards Xelari space, a storm of fire and vengeance. Sinclair turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "So what's the plan?" Kill every last one of them. Drake smiled. That's the start. The battle for the Xelari homeworld wasn't like the others. This time, there were no surprise attacks. No surgical strikes. This was a crusade. The human fleet didn't hesitate. They didn't wait. They didn't hold back. The first wave hit the outer Xelari defenses with the force of a dying star. The second wave plunged straight into their core systems, breaking apart their colonies in a relentless tide of fire. The Xelari screamed. They had never faced anything like this before. Not just resistance. Not just defiance. Total annihilation. Drake stood at the bridge of the Iron Fang, watching the battle unfold. Wreckage littered the void, burning in the darkness like dying embers. The Xelari's once unstoppable advance had turned into a desperate, chaotic retreat. And still, the humans pushed forward. They are breaking, Sinclair muttered. Drake exhaled, his cybernetic fingers tightening around the armrest. Good. Then, the final push. The Iron Fang led the charge into the Xelari's last remaining stronghold. Their homeworld, a writhing, biomechanical horror of a planet, its surface shifting with the constant movement of its hive forms. Drake keyed the fleet-wide comms. Burn it. And they did. Hellfire and antimatter. Kinetic rods and fusion lances. Weapons that had been banned, locked away, feared by the Council, unleashed without mercy. The Xelari screamed in their hive-mind agony as their world turned to cinders. And then, just like that, silence. The Xelari were gone. Not defeated. Erased. Hours later, the fleet regrouped. The battle was over. Drake sat in his command chair, staring at the wreckage of what had once been the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. Sinclair exhaled beside him. So, what now? Drake smirked. Now. He leaned back, arms crossed. Now the galaxy gets to live with what they created. Because the truth was simple. The war had changed humanity. It had forged them into something new, something worse. The Council had feared them before. Now, they would never stop fearing them. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly how it should be. The end.